Chapter 13. The capital city of the Fenachrone was situated in a jungle plain, surrounded by towering hills. The buildings, made of a dull, grey, translucent metal, were arranged in concentric circles, with lagoons, lawns, and groves between each ring. The lawns were lush and covered in dank mosses, while the groves were filled with palms, gigantic ferns, bamboos, and other tropical growths unknown to earthly botany. The jungle, which was impenetrable and unconquerable, began at the very edge of the city. In the center of the city stood a massive structure, a terraced cone of buildings, where the nobility and high officials of the Fenachrone resided. The emperor's apartments were located in the highest disk of all, invisible from the surface due to the omnipresent fog. In the council room, Fëanor, emperor of the Fenachrone, Fenimol, his general in command, and the full council of 11 were gathered around a great table. Before them was a three-dimensional moving talking picture showing the report of the sole survivor of the warship that had attacked the Bismark II. The captive had revived in the Violet and had heard the conversation between the engineer, Quinault, and Loring. They had sped for days and weeks with ever-mounting velocity toward the system of the Fenachrone. Finally, they approached the planet and passed within the detector screen. Quinault had tightened the controls of the attractors, pinning the Fenachrone helplessly against the wall. "Just to be sure you don't try to start something," he explained coldly. "You have done well thus far, but I shall take control from now on to ensure we do not fall into a trap. Please provide me with instructions on how to acquire one of your vessels. Once we have it, I may consider releasing you." "Idiots! Even if you had killed me in space and fled at top speed, you would still be too late. Our patrol is already upon you." Quinault and Loring drew their weapons, but a sudden force threw them to the ground and disintegrated their guns. The patrolling cruiser then neutralized the restraints holding the captive, transferring him to safety. The emergency report ended, and the ill-fated vessel's final transmission added little to what was already known of the disaster. Fëanor of the Fenachrone rose from his seat, seething with rage as he listened to the report. He hurled his chair across the room, vowing to torture and annihilate the beings responsible. "Fëanor of the Fenachrone!" A booming voice interrupted him, shaking the room. "Listen well, for I speak with the authority of the overlord of the Green System. You must abandon your foolish scheme of universal conquest and withdraw all your vessels to your own solar system. You have 5 minutes to decide, or your entire race will perish." Fëanor's furious voice was drowned out by the warning, and he knew he had no choice but to obey. The Fenachrone were in uproar as the Overlord's warning echoed through the council hall. Each member of the council stood, bellowing their defiance. General Fëanor quickly gave orders to recall all outlying vessels and prepare for battle. The insult to their superhuman race was not to be tolerated. As the council left to carry out their duties, Fëanor remained with General Fenimol to discuss further plans. Fenimol suggested bringing in Ravindau, the chief of the laboratories of science, to shed light on the source of the warning. They quickly retreated to a secure compartment in Ravindau's laboratory to avoid detection. Ravindau was furious, claiming that the Fenachrone's destruction was imminent due to the actions of their own royalty. Fëanor was outraged at Ravindau's insolence, but the scientist stood firm. He declared that allegiance to such a destructive monarchy was no longer viable. Fëanor was no longer in his throne room, surrounded by loyal guards and automatic rays. The fate of the Fenachrone was now in their own hands. "You stand in my laboratory, and with a mere gesture I can cast you into the abyss of eternity." The general, realizing the gravity of the warning, interrupted the heated argument. "Forget about the issue of royalty. The safety of our people is of utmost importance. Is the situation truly dire?" "It is not just grave, it is dire. Our only hope for victory is for as many of us as possible to flee the galaxy immediately, in order to avoid the inevitable destruction that will be wrought upon us by the overlord of the Green System." "Surely you speak nonsense," replied Fenimol. "Our science is and must be superior to any other in the universe." "That is what I believed until I received this warning and studied it. I now know that we are facing a science that is immeasurably more advanced than our own." "Are you referring to those 2 creatures that were captured by one of our smallest scouts, along with their vessel, without any resistance?" "No, not those creatures. I am referring to the one who calls himself the Overlord. He is our master. He can penetrate the impenetrable force shield and operate pure force mechanisms behind it. He can heterodyne, transmit, and use infrarays, whose very existence we were uncertain of until recently. While the warning was being delivered, he was most likely watching and listening to you face to face. You thought his warning was transmitted through the ether, and therefore assumed he must be near this system. He is most likely in his home in the central system, preparing the forces he will use against us. The Emperor slumped back into his chair, his arrogance gone, but the general leaned forward eagerly. How do you know all of this? Mostly through deduction. We, the scientists, have warned you repeatedly to delay the day of conquest until we have mastered the secrets of subrays and infrarays. However, you, the warriors, have ignored our warnings and continued with your plans, while we scientists have continued to study. We know a little about subrays, which we use every day, but we know almost nothing about infrarays. Some time ago I developed a detector for infrarays, which come to us from outer space in small quantities, and are also released by our power plants. It has been regarded as a mere scientific curiosity until today, when it proved to be of great value. This instrument in my hand is such a detector. Normally its light is blue when it detects infrarays. However, some time before the warning sounded, it turned a brilliant red, indicating that an intense source of infrarays was operating nearby. By plotting lines of force, I determined that the source was in the air of the council hall, almost directly above the table of state. The carrier wave must have passed through our entire system of screens undetected, proving that it was an infrared wave. Not only that, but it released a complex system of forces in the council room, allowing them to broadcast a modulated wave at the exact frequency needed to activate our speakers without any physical aid. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I quickly erected a force field around the council room that was impervious to anything longer than ultra-rays. But the warning continued, confirming our worst fears that there is a vastly superior race out there in the galaxy, and our destruction is imminent. The general asked if ultra-rays were dangerous, but I explained that they were of such a high frequency that they were thought to be useless. However, if a civilization could control them, they could be used as a carrier wave for any desired frequency, making them incredibly powerful weapons. We know so little about the fundamental nature of even our own subrays, let alone the potential of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The enemy likely has access to untold thousands of bands of unknown but terrifying potentiality. When Fenimol suggested that the Overlord was using vibrations in the ether, I reminded him that it was unlikely that the enemy would reveal their true capabilities to us. Flight to a far-off galaxy was our only hope for survival. Fenor, however, refused to accept such a flimsy basis for abandoning their home. He berated me for being a cowardly bookworm, insisting that they should not turn tail and run based on such scant evidence. But I knew that the threat was real, and our only chance was to flee before it was too late. The scientist stood firm, unafraid of the monarch's threats. He knew that the time for conquest was near, and the mighty Fenachrone would soon strike. But the weak and treacherous ruler before him was not fit to lead their race to victory. He had postponed the day of conquest for too long, and now their planet and entire race were doomed to destruction. With a flick of his finger, the scientist destroyed the monarch and revealed his true intentions to the general. He had long been planning for the conquest, assembling and organizing the means to put his plans into effect. And now, with a vessel twice as large as any warship, he would lead a group of the finest and most intelligent of their race to a distant galaxy, where they would multiply and continue their studies. From that planet, they would one day return to the central system of their galaxy and unleash the vengeance of the Fenachrone upon their enemies. The time for conquest was near, and nothing would stand in their way. The sweetest vengeance is one that is delayed, as the saying goes. But what about our resources? What if we don't live long enough to perfect our knowledge? And with only one ship and a small crew, we cannot defeat the Overlord and his space fleets. Fortunately, we have libraries, equipment, and apparatus on board. And anything we don't have, we can build. The knowledge we seek may not be attained in our lifetime, but the Fenachrone have a long racial memory. Even if our descendants must wait until they populate an entire planet, they will still exact revenge on the Overlord and conquer the universe. Of course, there will be many questions and obstacles to overcome, but we will find solutions. Time is running out, and I'm speaking to you now because we need your expertise in warfare. Will you join us?" The general agreed, and was led to an airboat waiting outside the laboratory. The airboat was controlled by Fenimol, who used a ray to navigate through the fog and avoid collisions with other vessels. Collision was not an option, as the space drive used by all Fenachrone craft was too powerful and could cause instant annihilation. The general asked how long it would take to prepare for departure, and Ravindau explained that the emergency signal had already been sent to all members of the organization. Most of them, with their families, were already on their way to the hidden cruiser. They would leave the planet in 15 minutes or less. The general's family was quickly loaded onto the airboat, and they flew to the secret rendezvous point in a remote part of the planet. There, a massive space cruiser was waiting to take them on their journey of conquest and revenge. Airboats, flying at incredible speeds through the thick, steamy fog, flashed signals along their guiding beams and dove into the seemingly impenetrable jungle. They added their passengers to the throng pouring into the great vessel. As the departure time approached, tension aboard the cruiser increased and vigilance was raised to the maximum. None of the passengers had been allowed any communication devices, and even the guiding beams were cut off, only to be received when the proper code signal was heard. The doors were shut, no one was allowed outside, and everything was held in readiness for instant flight at the slightest alarm. Finally, a scientist and his family arrived from the opposite side of the planet, the last members of the organization, and 27 minutes after Ravindau had flashed his signal, the prow of the mighty spaceship reared toward the perpendicular, poising its massive length at the predetermined angle. There it halted momentarily, then disappeared utterly, leaving only a vast column of tortured and shattered vegetation torn from the ground and carried for miles upward into the air by the vacuum of its wake, remaining to indicate the path taken by the flying projectile. The Fenachrone vessel continued on, with its ever-increasing velocity, through the thinning stars until the last star had been passed, and everything before them was entirely devoid of light. The galaxy behind them began to take on a well-defined lenticular aspect. Ravindau and Fenimol sat in the control cabin, staring out through the visiplates, abstracted. There was nothing at which to look, for outside the transparent metal hull of the spaceship, there was nothing visible. The galaxy which former astronomers considered the universe was so far behind that its immeasurable diameter was too small to affect the vision of the unaided eye. Other galaxies lay at even greater distances away on either side. The galaxy toward which they were making their stupendous flight was as yet untold millions of light-years distant. Nothing was visible. Before their gaze stretched an infinity of emptiness. No stars, no nebulas, no meteoric matter, nor even the smallest particle of cosmic dust, absolutely empty space, absolute vacuum and absolute zero, absolute nothingness, a concept intrinsically impossible for the most highly trained human mind to grasp. Conscienceless and heartless monstrosities though they both were, by heredity and training, the immensity of the appalling lack of anything tangible oppressed them. Ravindau was stern and serious, Fenimol moody. Finally the latter spoke. "It would be endurable if we knew what had happened, or if we ever could know definitively one way or the other whether all this was necessary. We shall know, General, definitely. I am certain in my mind that once we settle on our new home and the Overlord relaxes his watch, you will return to the Fenachrone solar system in a vessel like this one. You will witness our home planet, now a blazing sun second only to its parent sun in brilliance." Fenimol asked if we were safe from pursuit, but Ravindau's eyes, like wells of black flame, emitted almost tangible fires as he replied, "We are far from safe, but we grow stronger every minute. 50 of our world's greatest minds have been investigating the data my instruments recorded during the Overlord's visit. I cannot say more, but the day of conquest may not be as far off as we thought."